back, and in today's video I'm basically going to go over my music history. As you guys may be well aware of, some of you may not know, music is a very big part of my life. So this video will basically be an overview or synopsis, if you will, of just basically the background of when I started listening to music, what I was listening to, how that progressed into me, loving all kinds of music and really just becoming a fan. And so yeah, I'll get right into it, and I'll probably make this video a little more advanced than my previous ones. I'm starting to get a little more used to how how to make videos and do different things with it. So let's start off. So my music overview, basically this is just the background of how I got into listening to different types of music, and I'll get into a little bit later on what some of my favorite singers and bands are. But so I'm a millennial. So really I grew up loving 90s music. That's really what started my love for music. So it's right around that time is when I started listening to the radio, and the first radio station that I remember listening to was called 103.3 The Fox. It's a Buffalo station. It has since changed from then, but listening to 80s rock was really is a real eye-opener for me. Is really what drew me in, listening to all those great bands back then. I can remember Van Halen, AC/DC, Metallica, a lot of different bands like that, like hair metal, that sort of thing. I'll get in a little bit more about that later on. But so I started listening to 80s music mostly, and going into the 90s is when I started listening to other kinds of music other than just rock. So I think early 90s was when I listened to mostly rock and that sort of thing. And eventually I discovered Kiss 98.5. Was really, I love that station so much. The programming on there was really amazing. Played some really great songs, a lot of stuff like Eurodance, Euro Club, that sort of thing. Really dance and pop music is what Kiss 98.5 played, and that was the mid 90s is when I started listening to that, and man, that was the greatest music. Like, if I could go back to one time period and just keep listening to that kind of music, it would be then and there. I mean, really good station what they played back then. Q102, which is sort of changed over the years to Star 102.5. They play a lot of soft contemporary adult sort of thing. When I first started listening to them, they played mostly, well, some 80s and a lot of 90s sort of thing. Mostly top 40 airplay, the stuff that you would normally hear on a radio station, just really popular music and songs. Same with 96.1 WJYE, which was changing from Joy 96. That was a very contemporary station playing a lot of just adult themed music and stuff like that. And towards, well, so when I was listening to 103.3 The Fox, that was my favorite station, which I was listening to from the beginning of the 90s, and that eventually changed. Um, I actually know exactly when that changed is when my oldest brother was graduating from high school, which would have been the summer of 95, and that's when they changed into 103.3 The Edge. So their whole format changed, all their programming, and quite frankly, I didn't like it as much when they changed. Mostly because they did a transition from 80s rock into modern rock, which I mean, like I do love modern rock as well, but the way they programmed it and everything, it just wasn't as good. Um, and finally, towards the end of the 90s, there was a uh, short time period where there was a station called 101.7 The Spot, and they wanted to sort of compete with 103.3, but they didn't have as good as frequency, and not very many people really knew about them, so they never really stayed around very long. But man, they that kind of took me back to that 80s time period, because they played a lot of that and just really like 90s um, rock music, and I really love that station. And they weren't very well around very long. I do remember them being around for a couple of years, and I listened to them almost nonstop, and I really discovered a lot of new music with them too. But so really, those are the channels where I really discovered 90s music and what really made me fall in love with it. Um, and living in Buffalo and being in such close proximity to Canada, I've really had a lot of Canadian influence in music. Um, some of the channels that I listen to a lot, Mix 99.9, which is exactly that. They play mixed music. Um, 104.5 Chum FM is another one of my favorite channels. Well, it used to be. And then my favorite channel of all time, 102.1 The Edge. Now, this is Toronto's version of The Edge. Compared to ours, it just blows it out of the water. I mean, the Canadians' Edge is just way better. And when I really started listening to them, I remember it was I want to say it was around 97, 98 is when I started listening to 102.1, and man, they played like new modern rock, which I've never heard before, and I just fell in love with it. I mean, just really amazing programming, the way they set it up. And I'll get into exactly what kind of bands I love the most from that time period and things. But man, like, if you guys understood what kind of influence music has on my life, when I was growing up as a teenager, like, I just felt like I was such a loner. Like, I just felt so isolated. Like, I didn't have many friends. I didn't really go out and do a lot. So, I would find myself on a Friday and Saturday night when most kids were out, like, doing things, going on dates, playing sports, that sort of thing. I was just sitting at home in my room listening to headphones, and I'd be just listening to music, just like sort of drifting off of my own world. Um, just really escaping from reality, which was a um, pretty dark and dim reality that I was living. I wasn't happy with who I was. I didn't enjoy school very much, so it was really just a great escape for me, just to sit up late at night on the weekends and just vibe out the music. It was really, and growing up during that time period with the best music, it was really one of my brighter spots in life, like honestly. And I wish I could go back to that time period to experience it again. But so yeah, that's pretty much my influence and what I listen to. And today's music just isn't as good. Like there's no comparison. I feel like music has gotten way too commercialized. Um, Pretty much the industry, like all they care about is revenue now, and with streaming now, it's really changed a lot. And um, I get that like music piracy and that sort of things sort of changed the whole landscape, for the good and for the worse. There were, in other words, there were some good things that came out of that and some negative things. The good thing, I guess, the good things you could say about during that piracy period with Napster and that sort of thing, Kaza, was people like discovered new music. Before they had streaming services, everyone relied on that sort of platform to discover music that they would normally not hear on the radio. Um, and it was a lot cheaper, obviously, but um, some negative things was it was taking movie away from the movie producers, or not movie, but music producers and their labels and individual bands and singers that sort of thing. But um, I feel like music has really, in general, though, has changed because of that. Though um, I don't think the radio is as important as it used to be. Um, I think the radio used to have a much more bigger influence on just society as a whole, because not many people rely on the radio for the listen to music or for information anymore. Everyone's using their cell phone and using streaming services for information. That really advertising on the radio is really um, slowed down, and really I think that's all because of just the changing culture of music going from one medium to another. And I was listening to the radio most of the 2000s. I wasn't into iTunes right away like most people were, because I didn't have cable. So it was just too much for pain for me to listen to music on dial-up. So it wasn't until 2009 where I started using Spotify, and it was using Spotify is where I discovered um, where I started discovering a lot of new music to listen to, because literally you can jump from one artist to the next and just keep listening to music nonstop. And it was really a groundbreaking experience for me at the time, because I never had streaming before. So um, I do remember that Spotify being the first platform that I used for that sort of thing. And it wasn't until later on, after that, around 2010, I would say, is when I started using iTunes, not so much for their store, but just for discovering new musics by listening to the preview of the song, like the first, I think it was like first 30 to seconds to a minute long of the song, the first part of it. And they had a really good algorithm that I liked for recommendations. So I used iTunes primarily, mostly for that. Um, and I used that on and off and on until just a couple of years ago. Um, I mean, my music library is so big now, is I don't really have to rely on discovery anymore, because I pretty much know all the music that I like now. Um, then eventually, Google Play Music came along around 2013, and I I like that service because you could sort of integrate your own music into that while using streaming. So that was sort of a cool function to use with that. And really, I really loved Google Play Music, and they unfortunately discontinued it just a couple of years ago. But that's really where I categorized and really cataloged all my music into one library is using GPM's playlist. And then, last but not least, the newest service that I've been using, YouTube Music, which compared to Spotify and GPM just sucks. I mean, there's really no two ways about it. I mean, they're just um, like they're. I think their overall visualization and everything is okay. I wish that it was a lot more customizable though. And really just the functionality of the service is really terrible. Really haven't improved it much since the launch a couple of years ago, and I still mostly use Spotify just for that reason. It's just a lot more user friendly, and just it's just a better experience overall. So, and I began using Spotify Premium in 2014, so it's been using that for a very long time. I just really like Spotify. Um, they have good recommendations on there as well. Very good library. So if you guys are looking for something to use and you're not familiar with Spotify, I recommend just trying out the free version if you like it. Then with premium, you can get better quality music and with no ads. So that's why I've stuck with them for so long. So yeah, I mean that's pretty much the overview of my music synopsis and where I started to present day. And so this whole video will be sectioned off into different parts. This will be the end of my first part, and yeah, I'll follow up with you guys a little later in a future video to sort of wrap everything up. For now, I'll see you later. Alright, so just going over some of the 80s music that I grew up listening to on, a lot of this was on 103.3 The Fox. Just to give you an idea of what kind of music I'm into as far as 80s goes. So here you got some Queen there, Megadeth, Iron Maiden, Dio, Scorpions, Blue Oyster Cult, The Cult, Jackal, Quiet Riot, Twisted Sister, Warrant, Whitesnake, a lot of Van Halen, as you can tell. They're one of my favorite 80s bands. Def Leppard, who doesn't like them? Motley Crue, Black Sabbath, Ozzy, of course, Guns N' Roses, Aerosmith, Judas Priest, Cinderella, got a little bit of Ted Nugent on there, Faith No More, Skid Row, and Poison. So there you go. I got 100 songs on my 80s rock list. Alright, so let's move on then to 90s dance. A lot of this was on Kiss 98.5 and 104.5 Chum FM. I got 314 songs on this playlist, just under 24 hours. Yeah, this is a pretty big playlist, so I'm not going to name every group and singer, so I'll just let you go over them and see what I got. I mean, I just absolutely love listening to this kind of music. It just puts me in such a good mood. Very high spirited songs, real feel good type music. You know, um, just really simple songs with a good beat. I feel like a lot of dance music and pop music today are just overproduced or just so unoriginal that they're just not very good. Um, I feel like a lot of good 90s dance was very original and just was had a lot more substance to it. Um, a lot of the dance music and stuff today is like, I mean, primarily produced on like a laptop or something. It seems like it doesn't really take much talent anymore or a lot of effort or time to put into a song as it once did. So I feel like that's why the quality has gone way down, is because just the materials to make songs are so available right now that pretty much anyone can make a techno song or any kind of dance music like that. And it's really unfortunate because some of these songs are just so good and have become so popular that really people still listen to them today and think of them as some of the greatest songs as far as the dance is concerned. And you just can't find music like this anymore. I've tried looking, but a lot of the music that you find today is just um, the whole the whole music industry has shifted away from this type of this music, and it's really unfortunate. But you can't. I guess you can't expect music to stay the same forever. Everything goes through cycles, and um, you know, it's just like anything else. Like movies have changed, and I'll do a separate movie on videos. Don't worry. But I just want to give you guys an idea of some of the '90s dance that I've listened to. Um, yeah, like I said, it took a long time to compile this playlist, and not all of it is music I listened to when it was originally released. A lot of this I didn't discover till later on, but thankfully they have services like Spotify now and iTunes where you can sort of go back and find these hidden gems that you would otherwise not know exist. Um, so yeah, that's just a quick peek at my '90s dance. Let's just move on to this is like my '90s mix stuff. I got 292 songs in this playlist, 20 and a half hours in length. This would have been songs, most of it I heard on Q102, 96.1 or Mix 99.9. So yeah, I mean rock is my favorite, obviously, but I like all different kinds of music, and this is sort of just a lot of these songs I would heard on 101.1 the spot as well. Um, yeah, like REM, Bon Jovi is one of my favorite bands, as you can tell. I have a lot of him on here. Bryan Adams, also one of my favorite singers.
got some Gin Blossoms. I mean, they are so 90s. You know, if you had to pick one band that just exemplifies the 90s, it's them. Um, Hootie and the Blowfish, Counting Crows. We got a little bit Enya on here. Um, Alanis Morissette. She was like one of my first like singers that I really adored. Her breakthrough album "Jag a Little Pill" was just like amazing, and it still is. Like to this day, it's really held up really well over the years. Savage Garden was like one of my first favorite groups. I think that was actually, it might have been one of my very first CDs that I bought was Savage Garden. Their original self-titled. It was one of the very first CDs that I've ever owned. I love them. They were amazing. Um, yeah, they got played on Much Music a lot, and their follow-up album was also very good. And unfortunately, they haven't stayed together, but Spice Girls, believe it or not, I bought their first album, their debut album. I loved them when they first came out. They were so popular back then. It was hard not to like them, honestly. The Philosopher Kings, in my opinion, are one of the most underrated '90s um, group anywhere. If you like '90s music and you haven't heard the Philosopher Kings, I would recommend looking them up and listening to them. Unfortunately, their whole catalog isn't available on, at least where I'm at, on U.S. Spotify. But since they are a Canadian band, some of their stuff is harder to find, unfortunately. But they're one of the most underrated bands from the back then in the '90s. Lifehouse was sort of, I mean, they started right around the end of the '90s into the 2000s. They're still making music. Very good. Sugar Ray, they were very '90s as well. Ricky Martin. Everclear was sort of one of those. They were one of the original bands that I really liked and really got me into that kind of music. Vertical Horizon's very similar in that way. Um, the Wallflowers, Robbie Williams, Travis. I got Train, very good band. Um, Dave Matthews Band, one of my all-time favorite bands ever. As you can see, I got a shit ton of their stuff on here. Matchbox 20. Also one of my favorite bands. Yeah, I love them and I still do. And then I just have like more of a mixture of bands towards the end here. A lot of good throwbacks around the turn of millennium here. Yeah, as you can see, I like all kinds of music, and this is really just a compilation of all that good stuff back then. Alright, so I think that'll pretty much sum up that. And then let's go into some of the '90s rock music that I've started listening to back on 102.1 The Edge and a little bit from 103.3. In my opinion, this is some of the best music ever made, just period. Like, if you guys haven't heard this kind of music, you're really missing out. I mean, just a good blend of new rock. I think most of this song is definitely modern rock, coming out of the 80s when you had all the hair bands and heavy metal 80s bands. This is when it sort of transitioned to more of a modern rock era, sort of a transitioning of the guard sort of thing. And really, you had some big time players involved here. Jane's Addiction was one of the big ones. Lenny Kravitz was awesome. And then, of course, towards the end of the 90s, you've had some newer bands come around that sort of took the torch away. But yeah, this is like what I've listened to for decades now. I mean, I could never get sick of this kind of music. This is my favorite stuff. Huh, I got two of the same in there. Would you look at that? So yeah, this is sort of like what Spotify is good for, is discovering new music. Some of this music is just so ridiculous, but I love it anyways. So, trying to decide which one to take off here. Yeah, I'll come back to that. Anyways, yeah, I think I'll wrap it up there. I could get into my other playlist, but I think it would take way too long. So I just wanted to give you a little idea about the background of what I've listened to. I'll do another part of this video to sort of wrap the whole thing up, but yeah, so there you go. That's a little bit of what I listen to. I'll go into more detail about my favorite bands and stuff a little later on. Thanks for watching, guys. Hi everyone. Alright, so I'm just going to be going over one of my charts here that you guys might have seen at the beginning of the video, and this is just a very rough sketch. I don't assume this to be accurate by any means, but this is just my interpretation of different music styles and how they have evolved over the past few decades. And yeah, I'm just going to be going over this real quick. If you can see up top here, I have the different music genres in relation to their coordinating color here, and I've listed on the chart how they compare to other music genres by decade here, and you can see by the bottom I have it starting roughly around 1980 going up to present day. So let's just go through this real quick. As you can see, I had rock really popular going into the 80s, as you can assume in the 1970s you had all those older really founding rock bands that really started the whole new rock wave going into the 80s. So it really was popular coming right into the 1980s. Country has always, been a relevant
music style. I'm not really a big fan myself, but it's always had a profound place. Always very popular. Um, uh, Dance and pop. I mean, it was popular beginning in the 1980s because they're still coming out of that whole disco and early techno phase. So it was pretty popular even back then, a few decades back. Hip hop and rap really started more as like a blues thing. That was really in its infancy still back around 1980. And then I have the brown color, soft rock, and adult contemporary music. Um, that's always been popular because it's most accepted, I think. So it's sort of like the top 40 songs that you would normally find on the radio. The radio was really popular back then more than it is now, so of course you had many more listeners for that sort of music style. But yeah, let's just go through this real quick. I'll start off with let's start off with rock. So as I just said, really big in the 80s with the heavy metal bands, the hair bands. Really, the Brit rock really started around that time too. So really is pretty dominant throughout the 1980s. Took a little dip at the beginning of the 90s. Even though grunge started right around here, I would say, right in this territory. Um, only rock still took a little dip just because of other styles of music were starting to gain popularity, as you can tell right in this corridor right here. But really, grunge really started a new trend in rock, which continued in the mid 90s. And then, of course, you had modern rock, which really took off towards the end of the 90s and really took it to an all time high, in my opinion. Even though rock in general was probably more popular overall in this block, just because is compared to other music genres, it was just more listened to. But I think as an overall, it peaked right around this time because you still had listeners that were listening to the 80s bands from this time period, and you had the modern rock which exploded in this area. So it really around 2000 is when it really peaked, and that's when music piracy really started around that time because the demand for rock music was so high. Um, Going down to soft rock, as I just said, very radio driven, because radio was so popular back then. It really was dominant. Going into the 90s, radio airplay, things like that. Adult contemporary was always like one of the most listened to genres. Um, you have country, which has always been popular. I think it just peaked more in the 90s. More people listening to it around that time because more people discovered it with music television and that sort of thing. You had country music television coming around during that time, and more people were just following it in general. And then you have EDM and electronic. I sort of mixed that all up into one genre. Really, this was like the techno era right around here, and it sort of evolved. I don't think any specific style of music evolved more the past few decades than electronic music. I sort of include techno in here and just that sort of thing. Anything made with a synthesizer back in the 80s you can include in here. So yeah, it was coming out of techno as sort of like an upbeat tempo thing throughout the 80s, and then it started evolving more into a dance thing coming into the 90s when you had more Britpop and sort of like the Euro club songs coming around that time. So it really exploded throughout the 90s, and it just kept growing up and up and up. Then you have the club music really taking off around this time. Sort of evolved from more of a Euro dance thing in the 90s, evolving into the club songs in the 2000s, and then finally let's talk a little bit about hip hop and rap, what I have here as the pink color. Like, it wasn't really popular back then in the 80s. Like, if you just listen to any radio station back then, you're not going to hear much rap or hip hop, that sort of thing. It was more of like an underground sort of thing. You'd have to go to like a specific club or something to hear that style of music. And just because all these other styles is what you would hear on the radio. And then throughout the 80s, it gradually beginning more and more followers, and then in the 90s, when MTV started playing more of it, and just people sort of a culture shift into that type of thing, really started accelerating in the 90s. You have real old school rappers back then. Coming into the late 90s, you of course had Tupac and Notorious B.I.G. really leading the scene there, but it was still gaining momentum. And then right around the mid 2000s, it just skyrocketed. I mean, more than really any other music genre, and that was when rock was starting to decline. Modern rock was sort of like peaked out around this time, but started losing steam because there was really no big styles of rock left to come out around that time. You had some Brit rock bands that were starting to come out, but they weren't as popular as some of the previous bands that were really took over. So that allowed hip hop and rap to sort of catch up. At the same time, MTV was sort of like, MTV wasn't as big going in the 2000s as it was in the 90s. I think that's what helped hip hop grow originally, but I think people started discovering rap more in the 2000s. It just became more popular in culture, and then streaming became available, and iTunes, all that, around the mid 2000s. And with streaming, hip hop just continuing to rise, and you can see here just skyrocketing with a momentum shift. And as we get into like iTunes and Spotify and all those other streaming services available, physical media sales began to decline, which was a lot of these music genres mostly up here. And that sort of shifted more into a streaming momentum, as you can see here with hip hop. I also have dance and pop, which is the red, which has always been popular, but sort of here, if you see the red line, that became more popular with streaming as well. More people discovering that, but you can see that hip hop has shifted away from everything else and become the dominant style of music. So that's just a little explanation of the chart. again, I don't believe this chart to be super accurate, so don't kill me on accuracy. But this is just my overall interpretation of different styles over the years, um, and I just wanted to show that to you guys, and I'll go over the other rock chart I had at the beginning of this video real quick. Alright, so then just expanding on the previous chart a little bit, we have already talked about how popular rap and hip hop have become, but I wanted to go into a little more depth on why I think rock has become less popular, just because it is my favorite music style, and I just sort of want to give you my interpretation of why I think it's been declining over the past couple decades. And it really, you can trace it back to the shift into more of an internet-based society. And what I mean by that, well, rock production often requires the same production as a live performance. So basically, when you make music, you're using the same setup as you would live, and with supporting vocals. Most rock always consists of at least some vocals, so that's always been one of the main forefront of rock bands, is that front singer. And the most income for these rock bands or singers comes from these live performances these days, while older generations still buy physical media. And yeah, so like CDs obviously aren't as popular anymore, so rock bands rely on live performances for the majority of their income now. While older generations that grew up listening to the 70s and 80s rock, they still buy physical media, just not as much as they used to. And a lot of that has been supported by vinyl, which has really been seen an increase in popularity over the past few years, and that's boosted retail sales a little bit. But, and you know, moving over to rap and electronica production, this would include any kind of like dance music that you would use with the keyboard or dubstep, that sort of thing. That usually requires recording equipment such as mixers, laptops, computers used to process the song and record optional vocals with that. And really, you can do all that with a setup like this. You know, you usually don't need a whole recording studio. This could be often done in someone's own home, as long as you have the equipment. But bigger singers and production crews would use a bigger setup in a studio. But for them, media sales are limited to digital downloads, with a majority of revenue coming from streaming services. So unless you're like a huge big name DJ selling out arenas and like clubs and that sort of thing, they're usually relying on digital downloads like Amazon Music or something, and of course streaming services like Spotify, YouTube Music, and that sort of thing. So yeah, a lot of them rely on social media now to get more popular. Of course, now you have TikTok and Snapchat, that sort of thing, that would gain different DJs exposure. But when you go to live performances, they usually include similar equipment that you would use in recording, with added speakers and optional live vocals. A lot of that type of music, not all of it includes vocals, but when a lot of them do perform live, depending on which group and singer it is, a lot of them will just use recorded vocals with their performance. But of course, the bigger ones will have the singers perform live. like that would include rappers. That would just, you know, you got to have the rapper there. But the biggest difference is, you know, rock bands would all use physical instruments, while as opposed to rappers and a lot of DJs would just rely on like a lot of keyboards and that sort of thing. Not really different kind of instruments, I guess you would say. More like keyboards and laptops, that sort of thing. It's more synthesized and automated type of thing, where rock is more organic sounding. So those are the biggest differences. I just think that the convenience of this style of music has just become more popular because it is more convenient, and you know, it's just a sort of culture shift that we've seen over the past few decades. And you know, not one thing will stay the same over time anyways, but with music, I think it's just evolved from more of older generations listening to rock and that sort of thing. You have the younger generations listening more to rap and hip hop and electro dance, dubstep, that sort of thing. And a lot of that is because of this convenience that they have now with all these streaming services, TikTok, you know, a lot of just smartphone apps that you can listen to music now. You don't have to go out and buy a CD anymore. And so really that's my interpretation of why rock has declined, and it's really unfortunate to see that because I love rock and roll, and I would like it to see get more popular, make a comeback in some form. But you know, with this convenience trend, I'm not sure I'm seeing that right now, but I guess we'll wait and see what happens. So I guess with that, I will wrap up my whole music video. I hope you guys enjoyed it and learned something. I just wanted to give you a rundown of what kind of styles of music I listen to mostly, and you know, that sort of thing. So thanks everyone for watching. Hope you have an awesome day.